Hello, my name is Michele, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice.
If you've ever read the Book Yourself Solid by Michael Port, you may be familiar with his velvet rope policy. I remember when I first heard about that years ago, it was a really big deal to me. It's very eye-opening. This policy, if you will, this velvet rope idea is created to establish boundaries to make sure that you're working with your ideal client. So you go through a process of identifying your client and then giving them access to cross the velvet rope to work with you. Imagine walking down like the red carpet and there's a velvet rope, or you go to some opening event and they look at, is your name written in the book? Can you get by? That's kind of the idea behind it. And so in the podcast today, we're going to dig into creating barriers and then removing barriers so that the exact right ideal client can get in to work with you and the others will self-edit out.
Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice.
Recently, I was looking for a product and I found a website offering something similar. The more I looked at the offering and the description, I quickly recognized it wasn't for me. Conversely, when I found what I was looking for, it was like the stars had aligned and I couldn't click the buy now button fast enough. Have you ever considered that there are barriers in business, and have you ever considered what yours might be? You know, here's the thing. We're creating barriers to entry for the people that we don't want to work with, while at the same time removing those items that could be a barrier and that might be, getting in the way of our ideal client engaging with our team. Barriers in and of themselves, they're not bad. They're actually very useful tools when handled in the correct way. Think about it this way. You're sending your kids out to play in the backyard, and the barrier is either, the perimeter of your backyard. It could be play within the fenced area. We all have barriers. When we drive a car, we know what side of the road we should be on. There's some rules of the road. Those are barriers. We have age barriers to entry. You have to take a driving test and pass an eye test. So we have barriers that don't stop the people that it was set up to allow through, right? And our businesses are doing the same thing. So what I want to do is start by talking about some of the barriers that we might want to remove so that our ideal clients feel excited to move forward with us. I've gotten quite a few calls lately from workrooms, designers, people that are calling them saying, I want to work with you. We're all starting to see movement. It doesn't mean we're all 100% busy, but we do see movement overall in the industry. And so the phone has started ringing. And what happens is sometimes we get on the phone and we're super, super busy and we're having all of these conversations, but nobody's engaging because it's really not our ideal client. And so what we want to do is start figuring out, why are these people calling me? Why are they thinking that what I have to offer is what they need when clearly we're not aligned, right? So the first is to identify the barriers that we want to remove so that those that are working with us will continue. Consider it this way. What are the objections that you encounter or the pushback you get when someone's looking to work with your team? What is it that they say the most about? What gathers the most questions in your sales process? Because those are the things we want to look at, making sure that our ideal client gets all the answers they need so that all the expectations are set properly so that we're all on the same page. And I believe it is best to talk about and remove the barriers early on so that your perfect client, your ideal, to them, it never really felt like a barrier. It was just something else we're going to talk about. What's so great in this way of doing business is that those who are not your ideal could do the same thing when coming to your website, for example, that I did on the other. They will see a barrier that is existing for them that allows them to self-edit out. So here are a few barriers to entry that we might want to remove so our potential clients will more quickly say yes to working with us. We can get from that no to the like to the trust a lot faster. And so I'm going to throw some out to you. They're in no particular order. And when we're done looking at barriers that we want to remove, we're going to look at barriers that we want to create. Okay? So one of the first barriers that I would like to talk about is money. Money, budget, investment. I don't care what term we want to give it, and at different levels and conversations, we're going to term it differently. What we really want to do is remove the idea that this is cheap. We're going to talk about later, money's one of those same areas we may create a barrier for, but in this case, we want to remove it. And what's interesting? When we're actually creating the budget for our clients, I'll tell you that I think most of us sometimes are shocked. Even though we do it all the time, we're adding it all up and it's adding up quickly. Rarely do numbers ever come in less than what we think they'll be. And right now we're in the fall of 2020 when I'm recording this, we're experiencing a rise in the cost of construction materials due to the broken supply chain from earlier this year. Lumber, other supplies, it's costing so much more. And so what we quoted just a few weeks ago could be much higher now or much higher by the time those items come in. And if we're not prepared for this, our clients won't be either. This could be that quotes that they got back in March are no longer able to be honored right now. And that could be a barrier if we don't fully go in, understand it, watch the market, and know what's happening. Also, sometimes our clients just have no idea of what it is going to cost to get what they want. We joke about it all the time and we call it they have a beer budget and champagne taste. Some of us do the same thing in our own home and with our own selections of products to buy. But it can be a real thing at any price point. Maybe wanting to do an entire family room from the beginning to the end for $2,000 is just as ridiculous as having a $50,000 to $100,000 budget to furnish a $2 million house. It really comes down to what it is they want. And if we want to remove this barrier, then we need to be educated on the cost of doing business, the cost of quality and value products, and the cost of engaging our services. And we need to be able to articulate all of those costs really well. Because as we know, cost is tightly tied to the second barrier that we're going to talk about, and that's value. When a client values a product or service differently from the way we do as a company, we're going to have a disconnect, a misalignment. And this is where education becomes very important. If we can get buy-in early on to decide what's most important in quality and in value, then the cost of the project will come into a framework and make sense, right? But if we're looking at price separate from a full understanding of the deliverables and the transformation, it's what we call an unanchored price. We always want to anchor a price. It's unanchored. It's just out there, but we don't know what it's tied to. We don't understand scope of work, maybe. We don't understand the value. We don't understand all that is coming into play. I always start with a value conversation and move the price as a secondary or tertiary point that I want to make. So that any number that I give is anchored in a defined value and a defined quality. And so this is important. If you've got that client coming in, I always tell my designers that I coach, I don't care about the most expensive thing you sell. I care about the cheapest thing you sell. I care about the lowest quality and the cheapest thing that you're willing to put your company name on. That's what really matters. That is the defining part of your brand. You can always go up. You can always price more. But how low are you willing to go in value and in quality to put your company name on? And then that has to be commensurate with the amount of money that you charge to do it. And so we really, I think, would struggle if we tried to pull those apart. But see, people are coming to us sometimes based on a visual, what they see or what they think they want, and they don't really understand the value decisions that have to be made all along the way. And so if we don't have those conversations early on, then we could get, down the road and find out that somebody wants to put, a $30 sofa in the family room, and we're going to have a hard time dealing with that. Another barrier that we want to try to remove, which means all of this, by removing it, means we've got to hit it head on, talk about it, know how to articulate around it, and be able to move the client through the conversation. And this next one is timing. Creating a timeline, or knowing what a healthy timeline is, can be a barrier. Unrealistic expectations have been presented in many online fixer-upper shows, and they kind of show that mad dash through the weekend and a fully restored and refinished home on the other side. I mean, sometimes our potential clients have no idea that they only painted one wall in the room and that things are held together with duct tape and twine. Like, they don't see behind the curtain of all of that. Yet none of that would be sufficient if we tried to do it in our client's home. And so creating a reasonable timeline for a project and setting expectations is key. Again, we're in a time that our time, just with the pandemic and everything else, that our timelines are being thwarted from what they were. They're being pushed out. Everything is being delayed. And so we have to know that, and we have to tell them that up front. So we have to understand our own internal timelines. What can we get done? What can we not get done? We need to know how it's impacting the industry and also the subcontractors that we work with. Timing varies naturally throughout the year, and even now, even more with the demand for our services. Another barrier that we have to work through is the client doesn't fully know their own needs. They don't know what they don't know, and that's a barrier. The client doesn't fully understand the scope of what is necessary to get the results they're after. Again, HGTV and some of the other online restoration, fix it up, or flip this house, whatever, they've kind of misrepresented all that goes into interior design. We know they misrepresent with budget, and they tell them it's, $20,000, and you look at it and know that that means that 98% of everything was donated. And we know the designers in most cases don't get paid on those. They tell them, that they can do it all in a weekend, and we know that that's not possible to actually get the outcome that we want. And they don't even know what the scope is. They don't know, again, what they don't know. So a client may come in thinking they need one or two things, and you need to walk them through that they need more and that it is deeper, really working through the form and the function. I know we're talking about doing some work in our kitchen, and one of my designer friends asked me, well, does it function for you? And it was funny. We've been in our house 22 years. I'm like, sure, it functions. And then I thought, oh my gosh, there are some things that really don't. Like, what doesn't function? But because we hadn't been looking to do our kitchen prior to now, I never really sat and thought about it. And that is your job, right? That's what we do. That's the superpower, whether it's restoring a chair or making beautiful window treatments or staging. They just don't know. And so we have to fully be able to explore the project and what it needs to get that true transformation that they're looking for, really a full understanding. I think I can remember just on the drapery workroom side, thinking about all of the order placement, getting the fabric in, checking the fabric, making sure not only was it the right pattern on the right side, was it square, was it the virtual and the horizontal repeat that we were told? Does it have any flaws? I mean, there was so much work that went into just checking a fabric. It's not like we just trust what comes in. How many, horror stories are we hearing right now in regards to receiving product and it coming in damaged and not right? And, just this time right now, we have to so remove barriers and explain, or we are going to be underwater when this is all over, because it's shifting around us. And so we've got, number one, what the client doesn't know about their own needs, but they don't also understand the full process and what happens and all those little tiny things that have to get done for them to get the big picture idea that they want. And so just be super clear about it up front. I would rather us be clear and it come in better than to not tell them because we were fearful of it, and then we can't make the dates, because now we've created a barrier for our client to work with us well. Another barrier that can show up is having a spouse or a partner who's not on board, or who wasn't there from the beginning. You know, you all know this, but we need to make sure that we're asking for the decision makers to be present from the very first moment, and require it as much as possible. Like, reschedule if you have to, because this one thing will reduce stress later on. It doesn't matter if they tell you that that person doesn't have an opinion and they're not going to be involved, because they are going to be involved if they're living in that house. And there is nothing worse than you going through a portion of a design project, or, you know, no matter how far you've gone in the initial consult or all the way through the design phase, only to be told they've got to go back and get their partner's approval, or now the partner and spouse has an opinion that they didn't have before. And I've seen a lot of projects go off the rails just from this one thing. So to remove that as a problem or a barrier that could come up and cause a problem later, go ahead and talk to everybody invested in the project at the same time. And it's always best if they hear your explanations together, because that'll help reduce misinformation or some long, you know, strung out sales process. All right, so in light of all of these barriers, how do we remove them? There are certainly more. These are just kind of the highlights, the ones that we're seeing a lot of right now. The fact is, we have to educate around them. So we talk about them, you know, on your website, talk about them in your welcome materials, talk about them in your contracts, talk about them just to talk about them. Make certain. I would rather you give more good information than to not give it at all. Always start by removing or messaging around these in your online presence. So this includes copy on a website. This includes copy on social media. Continue that messaging as you go further with that client. You know, again, mention it in a welcome packet, or mention it in your process deliverables, or your 15-minute phone consult if you have it. You know, let them know I can't start that project until December, and it, you know, based on the way things are going, we won't have your project done until March or April of next year. Like, give them that information, because if you bring them in and we don't give them that information up front, just tell the truth of the matter up front, then they're going to, in some ways, think that there's broken trust, and it's going to create a barrier as you move forward. The questionnaire you send out might even ask certain questions that leads them to certain understandings. We just want the client to have very fair and reasonable expectations of their project prior to you showing up, prior to you working through it and making your process flow more smoothly. So the more that you can share about your design process, or budgets for similar rooms, or timing and scope of work, the better off you'll be. We don't want them to feel blindsided at any point. Okay, so those are barriers we might need to remove. Now let's talk about barriers we might want to erect or put up to keep the wrong client from calling us. So some of the barriers that we might want to put up, which allows them to self-edit. Remember, again, I said at the beginning, I went to a website, I thought it was what I wanted, I went through and read it and realized that's not for me. So now I didn't call them, I didn't reach out to them, I didn't have to do anything. I just closed the browser, walked away, and found another, you know, offer that did work for me. That's what we want your non-ideal to do. We really, if they are truly your non-ideal, we really don't want them to even engage with you too much, because that's just taking up your time that could be spent in a better way, supporting and going after those clients who you're perfectly suited to serve. So again, in no particular order, here are some barriers that we might want to create. The first is a barrier of your defined offer. So if there is a product or a service that you don't want to offer, do not put it on your website. Do not put it in your package list. If you only want to do full house renovations or full house builds, then your marketing should only talk about that as an offer. If you only want to do e-design, then that should be your focus. Don't muddy your own products and services by creating too many multiple offers and then being frustrated that somebody called and actually asked for one of them. Be very clear on who you are as a company and how you serve your clients. Whenever you are serving them in the process or in the product and service offerings that you love to do, that you have made profitable, you're going to be better off. So again, don't feel like you've got to follow some list of here's what you should have as your offerings. Make it just what you want to do. Another barrier you might want to put up is around your area of service. It seems simple, but if you want to work in a limited area, be clear about that. If you don't want to drive across town because it's 20 miles, but it takes you 1.5 hours, be clear on that too. Just say, here are the locations we serve, and you can leave it there. If you're willing to go, but for a higher price, just say that. Pricing will increase if outside of this service area. If you want to serve nationally or internationally or across the boundaries because you're doing e-design, put that in there. Be clear so that people know how to engage with you, where you'll go, where you won't go, and if there is an upcharge. If they're not willing to pay the upcharge to have you travel out of state, then they're not going to be your client. They really probably need to get a designer who's in state with them. A third barrier could be, what is the investment? Be as clear as you can. I am not necessarily a fan of putting all of your price list out on your website. I don't subscribe to that. I think, again, it has to be anchored in value. So just putting it out there without being able to articulate and really work through the value makes people price shop. But I will say this, if you have a minimum that you need to be able to leave your office or your home for, a minimum that you've decided will be necessary for you to engage in a project, then you can say it. And you can find a way to do it kindly. But something like a full room design begins at $5,000. You can even have a sample page that they're given during the sales process that allows them to see if they're within your ranges. This could be, if we do your family room and we need to buy everything and we're buying budget items, its starting cost is this, and you can show that to them. Go ahead and give it. They will self-edit if they cannot engage in that. Another thing that we might want to look at creating a barrier around is timing. If your ideal product and service has a timeline associated with it, again, say it. If you do whole house builds from the ground up, then mention that you work with clients for 1 to 2 years in your process. Anybody who's thinking that they're going to be a weekend warrior is not going to call you. So, if you only do weekend warrior projects, then the full service long-term clients are going to pass you by. What we want is for your ideal clients to look at your services and offerings and products, whether it's on social media or your website or your documentation or anything. And we want them to go, wow, this is the company for me on all of these points. And for your non-ideal clients, we want them to go, I'm out, check, this isn't for me. And so really, really, really think about that. What do they want? What do you need to educate on? And where do you need to put up a boundary where somebody says, I don't want to be bound by that? Cool, moving on. Here's the other thing. There is profitability in defining and creating and removing barriers to entry. Do you know where it comes in? It comes in by saving you and your team time. Even if you're paid a few $100s for an initial consult, right? So you say, oh, well, at least I got paid for it. The emotional investment of gearing up, putting on your clothes, getting your head in the game, driving there to go into a potential project has cost to you and to the client more than what you just got paid for, let's say, an hour or two of your time. And so there is this feeling of letdown when you walk away. I hated that feeling. My goal was I did not want to go to their home and then walk away and us not work together when I was excited about the project and they were excited about the project, but they didn't have the budget or they didn't have the timeline or some of those things were not in alignment. So I have worked really, really hard over the years to make sure that all of that is said in the very first call if it is really going to be a stickler to the process, because it saves everybody. What I want for you is that you will engage and spend your precious resources on those that you can most assuredly serve, not the tire kickers and not those who are looking for something different than your business brilliance. No one wants wasted time that could have been spent bringing in a profit. Write down the barriers that you want to remove or that you want to build. Message around them. Know who is best aligned to work with your team and for your team to work with. Talk to them. Go after them. They want to see themselves on your site. Like, oh, she's talking to me. He's speaking my language. That's what they're looking for. And in the process of being very clear on who you serve, the non-ideal clients will walk away. Profitability in a company shows up at every step along the way. Decision 1 leads to decision 2, and so on and so forth. And the earlier that we can tweak our processes and our messaging to allow the best work, the better off we'll be and the more joyful. Because it is so frustrating to get lead after lead after lead, and yet they all seem to be non-ideal. And when that happens, it is a sure sign that your messaging is off somewhere, or you are marketing in the wrong place. Like we talk about, you are fishing in the wrong pond. So go back, erect some boundaries, and remove the others. It does feel so much better to have an opportunity to talk through the projects that are best suited to your firm as compared to call after call. And then again, feeling that letdown feeling that the phone is ringing and you're busy talking to people who you'll never work with. That just makes me sad. It just feels terrible. And I know it feels terrible to the client. You know, we talk about making adjustments like this all the time in my coaching programs, because we are not the businesses now that we were last year, and we're not going to be the business next year that we are today. As our businesses morph, so do our products and our service offerings, and honestly, so does our messaging. Staying on top of this is key to forward movement and continued profitability. Please reach out. Let's talk if you have any of these struggles. You can go to scarlettthreadconsulting.com and book a discovery call. Let's all choose to be profitable, because profit doesn't happen by accident.